His hand reached for hers in the darkness, and she felt the cold weight of eternity in his palm. The candle flame wavered between them, casting shadows that seemed to breathe. Outside, the storm pressed against the windows like something alive, wanting in. She could feel his eyes on her face, searching for an answer she hadn't yet learned to give. The air tasted of iron and rain. Before we dive into this story, leave your rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're watching from. May this moment reach your heart. Night had fallen over the valley like a bitter blessing, and the wind in its continuous lament dragged the smell of iron and rain across the hills. On the high ground, where old stones resembled bones of a forgotten world, an isolated house trembled under the weight of the storm. There, where fire barely sustained its flame and solitude had become habit, lived the young woman the village had learned to ignore. A pale figure, almost a rumour, called only the seamstress's daughter. They said she had been born under an eclipse, and that her mother, dead in childbirth, had left her with the same gaze of one who foresees ruin. She grew up among murmurs and closing doors. She was beautiful in a silent way, but her beauty did not awaken desire, only superstition. The women averted their eyes, the men made the sign of the cross. Her virginity, preserved not by purity but by isolation, had become part of the legend that winter repeated. She moved through her days like a shadow learning the choreography of invisibility. The cottage where she lived sat at the edge of everything, close enough to see the village lights at night, far enough that no voice ever carried up the hill to reach her. Her mother's sewing table remained by the window, needles rusted, thread faded to the colour of old bone. She kept it there not from sentiment, but from the superstitious belief that moving it would invite worse fortune than she already carried. The villagers spoke of her only in whispers, and only when necessary. The baker's wife crossed herself when the girl appeared at dawn to trade herbs for bread. The blacksmith's son, who had once smiled at her from across the square, now turned his face away as if her gaze carried contagion. Even the priest, that man who spoke so often of charity and grace, would cut his sermons short when she entered the back of the church, his words drying up like water in sand. She learned early that loneliness was not the absence of people, but the presence of their avoidance. She learned that silence had texture and weight, that it could press against your skin until you forgot what your own voice sounded like. She spoke to the wind sometimes, and to the crows that gathered in the dead tree behind her house, their black wings like torn pieces of night. The cottage itself seemed to absorb her solitude, the walls growing darker each year, the windows smaller, as if the house was slowly closing its eyes. She kept the fire burning more from habit than warmth, watching the flames dance their ancient patterns while the wind outside told stories she had heard 1,000 times before. On the night he arrived, the storm had been building for 3 days. The sky had turned the colour of old bruises, purple and green and sick yellow, and the wind carried voices in it, or things that sounded like voices. She had been sitting by the fire mending a shirt she would never wear when the thunder brought something more than rain. At first she thought it was the wind, a heavy thud against the door like a branch torn loose and flung against the wood. But then it came again and again, a rhythm too deliberate to be chance. She set down her needle, her hands suddenly cold despite the fire. No one came to her door. No one had come to her door in 3 years. Not since old Martha had died, and there was no longer anyone in the village who remembered her mother with kindness. She stood slowly, her legs uncertain, and crossed the small room. The door shuddered under another impact, and she could hear something now, a sound beneath the thunder, breathing, laboured, and wet. When she opened the door, the storm rushed in like something that had been waiting for permission. Rain slashed across her face, cold enough to burn, and the wind tried to tear the door from her hands. But she barely noticed these things, because there on her threshold lay a man covered in mud and blood, his eyes like shards of glass beneath the shadow of his hood. He was not like the men from the village, even collapsed, even bleeding. There was something about him that spoke of authority, of a life lived in rooms where others bowed and scraped. His clothes beneath the mud and blood were fine, the kind of fabric she had only ever seen from a distance on market days when the wealthy passed through. His boots, though stained, were made of leather so soft it seemed to drink the rain rather than repel it. Those eyes found hers, and she felt something inside her chest constrict, as if her heart had suddenly remembered how to be afraid. Not the small, familiar fear of violence or cruelty, but something older, something that lived in the blood and bones and recognized its own ending when it saw it approaching. He spoke, and his voice was too low to be entirely human, each word resonating in a register that made the fire behind her flicker and dim. "Do not fear," he said, and the candle on the table guttered as if acknowledging an order. She should have closed the door. She should have run or screamed or done any of the things a sensible woman would do when a stranger appeared bleeding and strange on a night when the storm felt like the end of the world. But she did none of these things. Instead, she stepped back, leaving room for him to enter, watching as he dragged himself across her threshold and left dark prints on the floor that looked black in the firelight. He collapsed again just inside, his breathing harsh and irregular. She closed the door against the storm, and the sudden quiet felt almost violent, broken only by his laboured breaths and the snapping of the fire. She stood for a moment, her back against the door, trying to understand what she had just done, trying to find within herself some explanation for this choice that felt less like a choice and more like inevitability. Then she moved, because whatever else she was, whatever the village had made her into, she had been raised by a woman who healed the sick and brought children into the world, and some knowledge runs deeper than fear. She brought water from the bucket by the hearth, clean rags from her small store of linens. She knelt beside him, her dress soaking up the water and mud that pooled around his body, and began to work. His coat was heavy and stiff with dried blood, and she had to cut it away with her sewing scissors, the fabric parting with a sound like tearing skin. Beneath the wound was savage. Something had torn into his side, 4 parallel gouges that looked like claw marks, deep enough that she could see the white of bone beneath the torn flesh. But the blood that leaked from the wounds was wrong, darker than blood should be, with a strange viscosity that made her think of honey or oil. He watched her as she cleaned the wounds, his eyes never leaving her face. She should have been frightened by that gaze, by the intensity of it, but instead she felt strangely calm, as if she were moving through a dream where normal rules did not apply. Her hands did not shake as she packed the wounds with the herbs her mother had taught her to use, the ones that stopped bleeding and fought infection. Her voice did not waver when she told him to lie still, to let the medicine work. She brought blankets and built up the fire until the room was almost uncomfortably warm. She made a thin soup from the vegetables in her larder and managed to get some of it into him, though his throat worked strangely when he swallowed, as if he were trying to remember how the action was supposed to feel. Night deepened around them, and the storm continued its assault on the valley. She sat beside him, listening to his breathing gradually steady, watching the firelight play across his face. He was handsome in the way that dangerous things are often beautiful, all sharp angles and shadows, his skin so pale it seemed to glow in the darkness. Sometime near dawn, when the storm had finally exhausted itself and the world outside lay quiet and drowned, he spoke again. His voice was stronger now, though still carrying that strange resonance that made the air feel thick. "You should not have let me in," he said. She considered this, her hands folded in her lap. "Probably not," she agreed. "But then, no one has ever accused me of making wise choices." Something that might have been a smile touched his lips. "You are not afraid?" It was not a question, but she answered anyway. "I am," she said. "But I have been afraid my whole life. This is just a different kind of fear." He studied her for a long moment, and she felt that gaze searching her face, looking for something she could not name. "What is your name?" he asked finally. She told him, though she could not remember the last time anyone had asked. The sound of it in the air felt strange, like hearing a word from a foreign language that you once knew but have long since forgotten. He did not offer his own name in return, and she did not ask for it. That morning, when the sun finally broke through the clouds, she went to the window and looked down at the village. Smoke rose from chimneys, and she could see small figures moving through the muddy streets, life continuing as it always had. She wondered if they knew what had entered their valley in the night. If they could feel the change in the air the way she could, like a string pulled tight and beginning to hum. Behind her, the stranger slept or seemed to sleep, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm that was almost but not quite human. She turned back to look at him, this man or creature or whatever he was, and felt the first stirring of something she had not felt in years. Not hope, exactly. Something more dangerous than that. Something that felt like possibility. The day passed in strange quiet. She went about her usual tasks, drawing water, tending the fire, working on the mending that never seemed to end. But her attention kept returning to him, measuring the rise and fall of his breathing, watching for any sign of fever or worsening. The wounds, when she checked them, looked better than they should. The flesh already beginning to knit together in ways that defied her understanding of healing. By evening, he was sitting up, leaning against the wall she had padded with blankets. His colour had improved, though improved was perhaps the wrong word. He looked less like a corpse and more like something carved from marble, beautiful and cold and utterly still except for those eyes that followed her movements around the room. "Tell me about this place," he said as she brought him more soup. "The village below. What manner of people live there?" She hesitated, the bowl warm in her hands. "They are ordinary people," she said finally. "Farmers and merchants and craftsmen. They fear what they do not understand and hate what they fear. And you live here alone, apart from them. Why?" "Because they will not have me among them," she said, and heard the bitterness in her voice surprise her. "I was born under ill stars, or so they believe. My mother died bringing me into the world, and they think I carry her curse with me." "Do you?" he asked. "Carry her curse." She looked at him directly, meeting those strange eyes. "I do not know," she said. "I only know that I am here, and they are there. And the distance between us might as well be the width of the world." He was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider this. Then he said, "I know something of curses, of being feared and set apart. It is a lonely thing." "Yes," she said simply, and felt in that moment a connection form between them, fragile as spider silk but real nonetheless. The second night brought dreams. She slept fitfully in her chair by the fire, unwilling to leave him unattended. And in her dreams she saw great halls lit by candles that never guttered, and heard music that made her heart ache with longing for places she had never been. She saw a castle on a distant mountain, its towers piercing the clouds, and knew somehow that this was where he came from. This stranger who had collapsed on her doorstep like a gift or a curse or both. When she woke near dawn, he was standing by the window looking out at the valley. The wounds in his side had nearly closed, only thin red lines remaining where the gouges had been. He turned when he heard her stir, and in the grey light of approaching dawn, she could see his face clearly for the first time. He was beautiful, not in the way of the village boys with their rough charm and easy smiles, but in the way of something that had forgotten how to be human and had not quite decided what to become instead. His beauty was cold and perfect and terrible, and looking at him made something inside her chest tighten with an emotion she could not name. "I must leave soon," he said, "before full light. It is not safe for me here in the day." She nodded, though the thought of his leaving created an emptiness inside her that she had not expected. "Will you return?" she asked, and hated the hope she heard in her own voice. He crossed the room to her, moving with a grace that seemed to defy the injuries he had sustained. He stopped before her chair, looking down at her with an expression she could not read. "Perhaps," he said, "if you do not bar your door against me." "Why would I bar my door?" she asked. "Because," he said softly, "you should. Because I am not what you think I am, and knowing me will bring you only sorrow." "I have known nothing but sorrow my whole life," she said. "At least your sorrow would be interesting." That almost smile touched his lips again. "You are a strange woman, seamstress's daughter." "So I have been told," she said. He reached out then, and she thought he might touch her face, but instead his hand hovered just above her cheek, close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from his skin. "When I return," he said, "things will be different. The village will notice. There may be danger. There is always danger," she said. "It is just usually quieter." He lowered his hand and stepped back. His eyes held hers for a moment longer, and in them she saw something that might have been regret or warning or promise. Then he turned and crossed to the door. "Wait," she called, and he paused. "What are you?" she asked. "What should I call you when I tell myself stories about this night?" He was silent for so long she thought he would not answer. Then, without turning back, he said, "They call me the Lord of the Distant Places, the Keeper of the Night Hours, but you may call me what you wish." And with that, he opened the door and stepped out into the pre-dawn darkness. She rushed to the window and watched him descend the hill, moving like a shadow among shadows, until he disappeared into the tree line below. The sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky with streaks of rose and gold, and she wondered if he had made it to safety, wherever that might be for something like him. The village noticed his passing, though they did not know what they were noticing. She heard about it 3 days later when she went down to trade herbs for bread. The baker's wife, usually so quick to turn away, leaned in close with eyes bright with gossip. "There was something in the valley that night of the storm," she whispered. "Old Tom found tracks in the mud outside his barn, and they were not animal tracks, not exactly. And there was blood dried on the stones of the old road. People are saying things. Bad things." "What kind of things?" she asked, though her heart had begun to beat faster. The baker's wife glanced around, then lowered her voice even further. "They are saying it was one of them. The cursed ones, the night walkers. The priest has been blessing the doorways and burning sage in the church. He says we must be vigilant, that evil walks among us, seeking whom it may devour." She kept her face carefully neutral, took her bread, and climbed back up the hill to her cottage. Once inside, she leaned against the door and tried to calm the panic rising in her chest. They knew, or they suspected. And if they suspected, then it was only a matter of time before someone connected the stranger to her isolated house on the hill. That night, she did not sleep. She sat by the window watching the darkness, waiting for something she could not name. The wind had picked up again, not the violence of the storm, but a steady, persistent pressure against the walls. It carried sounds with it, or perhaps she only imagined the sounds. Whispers and footsteps, the rustle of movement in the trees below. Near midnight, she heard it. A soft scratching at the door, rhythmic and deliberate. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. The scratching came again, then a voice low and familiar. "It is only me," he said through the wood, "if you will have me." She crossed the room and opened the door without hesitation, though every rational part of her mind screamed that this was foolishness, that this was how girls like her ended up dead and forgotten. He stood in the threshold, and this time there was no blood, no mud, no appearance of injury. He looked as he had that morning when he left, cold and perfect and dangerous. "You came back," she said. "I told you I might," he replied. She stepped aside and he entered, bringing with him the smell of night air and something else, something wild and ancient that made the fire flare briefly before settling again. He moved to the center of the room and turned to face her, his expression serious. "I should not have come," he said, "but I find that I cannot stay away. You have gotten into my thoughts, seamstress's daughter. You have made yourself a complication." "I did not ask to be a complication," she said, closing the door and leaning against it. "I only offered shelter to someone who needed it. And in so doing, you bound yourself to me," he said. "There are rules about such things, old rules that even I must follow. You gave aid freely, asking nothing in return. That creates a debt. I want no debt," she said. "Nevertheless," he said, "it exists. And because it exists, I must tell you what I am, so that you may understand the danger you are in." He told her then, standing in the center of her small cottage with the firelight casting shadows across his face. He told her about the castle in the mountains, about the others like him who lived there in the spaces between life and death. He told her about the hunger that drove them, about the centuries he had walked the earth watching empires rise and fall while he remained unchanging. He spoke of loneliness that stretched beyond comprehension, of watching everyone he had ever cared for wither and die while he endured. He told her about the thing that had attacked him, a rival from another territory who had challenged his rule and left him wounded and weakened. He told her how he had fled seeking shelter, and how her cottage had been the only light in the darkness, the only warmth in the cold. And now, he said, his voice dropping to barely more than a whisper, "Now they will be looking for me, and they will find the trail that leads to your door. You are in danger because of me." She had listened to all of this in silence, her hands clasped in front of her, her face pale but composed. When he finished, she said simply, "Then what would you have me do?" "Come with me," he said. "Let me take you somewhere safe, somewhere they cannot reach you." She shook her head. "This is my home. Poor as it is, lonely as it is mine. I will not abandon it because of fear." His jaw tightened, the first real emotion she had seen cross his face. "You do not understand. They will not simply kill you. They will make an example of you. They will make you suffer in ways you cannot imagine." "Then stay," she said, surprising herself with the fierceness in her voice. "Stay and protect me if I am in such danger. Is that not what your debt requires?" He stared at her, and something flickered in his eyes that might have been admiration or frustration or both. "You are asking me to declare you under my protection. Do you understand what that means? What it would make you in their eyes?" "It would make me what I already am," she said. "Someone set apart, someone different. At least then I would have chosen it." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Finally, he said, "If I do this, your life will never be the same. You will be bound to me and I to you. There will be no going back." She met his gaze steadily. "I have never been able to go back. I have only ever been able to go forward, so let us go forward." He nodded slowly, and something in the air seemed to shift and settle, as if the world itself had acknowledged a contract made. "Very well," he said. "Then from this night forward, you are mine to protect, and I am yours to command, within the limits of my nature." She did not fully understand what had just happened, what ancient ritual they had stumbled into, but she felt it nonetheless. A connection forming deeper than words, binding them together in ways that transcended the simple relationship of protector and protected. He stayed that night, sitting in the chair by the fire while she lay in her bed, neither of them sleeping, both of them listening to the wind outside and the silence inside. As dawn approached, he said, "I must go again, but I will return tomorrow night, and the night after, until it is safe for you to accompany me to my home." "Why not tonight?" she asked. "Because there are preparations to be made," he said. "Because the court must be informed and challenges must be answered. Because I will not bring you into that world until I can guarantee your safety." "And can you," she asked, "guarantee it?" He turned to look at her, his eyes catching the dying firelight and throwing it back in shades of amber and gold. "I can," he said, "or I will die trying." She wanted to tell him that she did not want him to die, that the thought of it created a hollow place in her chest that she did not understand. But the words stuck in her throat, and before she could find others to replace them, he was gone, slipping out into the pre-dawn darkness like smoke dispersing on the wind. The days that followed took on a dreamlike quality. She went about her normal routines, but everything felt strange and distant, as if she were watching herself from far away. The village below seemed smaller somehow, less significant, its concerns and prejudices fading into insignificance against the vastness of what she had learned, of what she had become part of. The baker's wife noticed something different about her when she came down for bread. "You look strange, girl," she said, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Have you been ill?" "No," she replied. "I have been well." "Better than well." The woman's eyes narrowed further. "There are stories," she said, "about lights seen on the hill at night, about voices heard when no one should be speaking. People are talking." "Let them talk," she said, and took her bread and left before the woman could say more. That night, he came earlier, appearing at her door just as the last light faded from the sky. He looked different somehow, more substantial, as if the brief time away had allowed him to recover some essential quality he had been lacking. When he entered, the cottage seemed to shrink around him, unable to contain the presence he brought with him. "It is done," he said. "The court has been informed. There were objections, as I expected, but none who dared to challenge my decision openly." "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," he said, "we wait 3 more nights to observe the proper forms. Then I will take you to my home, and you will be presented formally as under my protection." "And what will they think of me?" she asked. "These creatures of your court," he smiled, and there was no warmth in it. They will think what they always think when I do something unexpected. They will scheme and plot and try to find ways to use it to their advantage. But they will not harm you. That I can promise. She wanted to believe him, but fear had begun to creep in around the edges of her resolve. "What have I done?" she whispered. "What am I becoming?" He crossed to her and for the first time touched her face with his cold fingers. "You are becoming what you always were," he said softly. "You are simply allowing the world to see it." The 3 nights passed too quickly and too slowly. Each evening he came and they sat together in the small cottage, talking of small things and large things, of the lives they had lived and the futures they could not yet see clearly. She learned that beneath his cold exterior lay a mind that had witnessed centuries of human folly and triumph, that had loved and lost more times than she could count, that carried wounds older than her entire bloodline. And he learned about her, about the small cruelties of isolation, about the way silence could become its own language, about the strength required to wake each morning and choose to continue when everything around you insisted you should simply disappear. On the final night before they were to leave, the village made its move. She heard them coming up the hill, their voices raised in righteous anger, their torches casting wild shadows across the landscape. The baker's wife had finally convinced the others, had woven together enough suspicion and fear to forge them into a mob. They were coming for the witch on the hill, coming to cleanse the valley of her corrupting presence. He was already there when they arrived, standing in front of her cottage like a statue carved from ice and shadow. She watched from the window as the mob came to a halt 20 paces away, their courage suddenly faltering in the face of his presence. The priest stepped forward, holding his cross before him like a shield. "We know what you are," he called out, his voice shaking only slightly. "We know what evil you bring with you. Leave this place, demon. This girl is under God's protection." She saw him smile, and even from a distance, she could see the predator in it. "This girl," he said, his voice carrying easily across the space between them, "is under my protection. And I do not share." The priest's face paled, but he stood his ground. "We will not allow you to corrupt her further. We will not allow you to spread your poison through our valley. Then you will die," he said simply. "All of you. Tonight. Unless you turn now and go back to your homes and never speak of this again." The mob wavered, fear and anger warring on their faces, but the priest, foolish or brave or perhaps both, took another step forward. "We are not afraid of you, creature. God is with us." What happened next took only seconds but seemed to stretch into eternity. He moved faster than thought, and suddenly he was standing before the priest, his hand wrapped around the man's throat. He lifted him effortlessly, holding him suspended in the air like a child's toy. "Your God," he said softly, "is not here. But I am. And if you ever threaten what is mine again, I will paint these hills with your blood and make monuments of your bones. Do you understand me?" The priest made a choking sound that might have been assent. He released him, letting him fall gasping to the ground, and turned to face the rest of the mob. They scattered like leaves before a storm, fleeing back down the hill in a panic, leaving only the priest crawling after them on his hands and knees. She came out then, standing beside him in the darkness, looking at the retreating figures. "That was terrifying," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "It was meant to be. They will never leave me alone now," she said. "They will tell stories. I will become a monster in their legends." "Then let them tell their stories," he said. "You will be far from here where their words cannot reach you." His voice softened and he turned to face her. "Unless you have changed your mind, unless you wish to stay." She looked back at the cottage, at the place that had been her prison and her refuge, at the life she had known with all its small familiarities and large sorrows. Then she looked at him, at this impossible creature who had stumbled into her existence and offered her something she had never dared to dream of. Choice, agency, the possibility of a different story. "No," she said, "I have not changed my mind. Take me with you." He nodded, and she thought she saw something like relief in his expression. "Then gather what you wish to bring," he said. "We leave within the hour. The pack will not take long to gather courage again. And next time, they may come with more than torches and prayers." She went back inside and looked around the cottage, trying to decide what to take from a life that suddenly seemed to belong to someone else. In the end, she took very little. Her mother's sewing box, a few clothes, the iron necklace her mother had worn. Everything else she left behind, remnants of a girl who was already becoming a memory. When she emerged, he was waiting, and without a word, he lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. She should have protested, should have insisted on walking. But exhaustion and emotion had drained her, and she found herself leaning against his cold chest as he began to move down the hill, taking a path that avoided the village entirely. They walked through the night, and she dozed fitfully against him, lulled by the rhythm of his movement. When she woke, they were in forests she did not recognize, old growth trees that blocked out the moon, roots that seemed to reach for them as they passed. "How much farther?" she asked. "Not far now," he said. "We will reach the outer gates before dawn." She must have slept again, because the next thing she knew, she was being set gently on her feet, and before her stood a castle that seemed to have been carved from the mountain itself. Towers rose into the darkness, windows glowed with a light that was not quite fire, and the air hummed with something that made her skin prickle with awareness. "This is your home," she said, and it was not a question. "This is our home now," he corrected. "Come, let me show you what it means to be protected by the Lord of the distant places." The gates opened at their approach, massive doors of wood and iron that moved silently despite their size. Beyond lay a courtyard paved in dark stone, and beyond that, the entrance to the castle proper. Figures moved in the shadows, watching, waiting, assessing this human girl who had been brought into their midst. She lifted her chin and walked forward, refusing to show the fear that churned in her stomach. Whatever came next, whatever trials awaited her, she would face them as she had faced everything else in her life, with dignity, with silence, and with the stubborn refusal to be broken that had kept her alive through all the years of isolation and scorn. He led her through corridors that seemed to shift and change as they walked, past rooms where music played with no visible musicians, past galleries hung with portraits of people whose eyes seemed to follow their progress. Servants bowed as they passed, their faces carefully blank, revealing nothing of their thoughts about this unprecedented situation. Finally, they came to a set of doors carved with symbols she did not recognize. He opened them to reveal a suite of rooms that took her breath away. The main chamber was larger than her entire cottage had been, with a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. Tapestries covered the walls, depicting scenes of hunts and battles and strange ceremonies. A fire burned in a hearth large enough to stand in, and furniture of dark wood and deep velvet filled the space. "These are your rooms," he said. "You will be comfortable here, I think. If there is anything you need, you have only to ask." She walked into the room slowly, trying to take it all in. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, luxury beyond anything she had ever imagined. "Where will you be?" she asked. "Near," he said. "Always near. But you will have your privacy, your own space. This is important, I think. You have been alone so long. You should not feel caged here." She turned to look at him, this creature who had upended her existence, who had offered her protection and sanctuary, and something that might, in time, become more. "Thank you," she said simply. He inclined his head. "Rest now," he said. "Tomorrow you will be presented to the court. It will not be easy, but you will not face it alone." After he left, she stood in the center of the vast room and tried to process everything that had happened. 3 weeks ago, she had been the rejected girl on the hill, living a life of quiet desperation, waiting for nothing because nothing ever came. Now she was here, in a castle full of creatures who drank blood and lived for centuries, protected by a being who could crush her with one hand, but had instead chosen to shield her from harm. She should have been terrified. Part of her was. But another part, the part that had always known she was meant for something other than slow death by loneliness, felt something that might have been excitement or anticipation or the first stirring of joy. She removed her mother's necklace and laid it carefully on the dressing table, then climbed into the enormous bed. The sheets were silk, cool against her skin, and the pillows were so soft she sank into them like water. Despite everything, despite the strangeness and the uncertainty and the danger, she fell asleep almost immediately. She dreamed of flying over dark forests, of seeing the world spread out below her like a map made of shadows and light. In the dream, she was not afraid. In the dream, she was free. She woke to find a servant standing by her bed, a young woman with pale skin and eyes the colour of twilight. The servant curtsied when she saw she was awake. "My lady," she said, "the master has sent me to help you prepare for the evening. The court gathers at sunset." "Evening," she repeated, confused. "What time is it?" "Nearly 3 in the afternoon, my lady. You have slept through the day. The master said to let you rest as long as you needed." She sat up, pushing her hair back from her face. The room looked different in the thin light that filtered through the heavy curtains. Less intimidating, perhaps, but no less grand. "I need to prepare," she said. "What do I wear?" "What do I say?" "What do I do?" The servant smiled, and there was something almost kind in it. "You wear what I have brought you. You say what is in your heart. And you do what you have already been doing. You survive." Over the next hours, she was bathed and dressed and groomed until she barely recognized herself in the mirror. The dress they gave her was deep blue, almost black, with silver embroidery that caught the light like stars. Her hair, usually left to hang loose and unkempt, was braided and pinned in an intricate style that made her neck look longer, her face more refined. They gave her no jewelry except a simple silver circlet that rested on her brow like a crown. When she looked at her reflection, she saw not the seamstress's daughter, not the rejected girl from the hill, but someone else, someone who might belong in this strange, dark place. The servant stepped back, admiring her work. "The master will be pleased," she said. "You look every inch a lady of this house." "I am not a lady," she protested. "You are what he says you are," the servant replied. "And he says you are under his protection, which makes you untouchable by any save him. That, my lady, is more than many born to this life can claim." Before she could respond, there was a knock at the door. The servant opened it to reveal him standing in the corridor, dressed in formal attire that made him look even more imposing than usual. His eyes found hers, and she saw something flicker in them. Approval, perhaps, or something deeper. "You are ready," he said. "No," she replied honestly, "but I will go anyway." That almost smile touched his lips. "That is all I ask." He offered her his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His skin was cold through the fabric of his sleeve, but solid, real, an anchor in a world that had become suddenly unmoored. Together they walked through the corridors toward the great hall where the court waited. She could hear them before she saw them. Voices raised in conversation, the clink of glasses, the rustle of expensive fabric. Her heart began to beat faster, and she felt sweat prickle at the base of her spine despite the coolness of the air. She wanted to run, wanted to go back to her rooms and hide, wanted to wake up in her cottage on the hill and discover this had all been some fever dream. But his arm was steady beneath her hand, and his presence beside her was immovable. And so she kept walking. The doors to the great hall opened and silence fell like a blade. Every eye in the room turned to them, dozens of pale faces registering shock, curiosity, disdain. She felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing, pressing down on her shoulders, making it hard to breathe. He led her forward, walking the length of the hall toward the high table at the far end. The crowd parted before them, and she could hear whispers starting, spreading like fire through dry grass. Human, mortal. What is he thinking? The shame of it, the scandal. She kept her head high, her face composed, even as fear clawed at her insides. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She had survived worse than their disdain. She had survived a lifetime of it. When they reached the high table, he turned to face the assembly, keeping her beside him. His voice, when he spoke, carried to every corner of the vast hall. "I present to you the one who gave aid when I was wounded, who offered shelter when I had nowhere else to turn. She is under my protection, and any who harm her answer to me. This is not a request, this is a declaration." A man stepped forward from the crowd, tall and elegant, with hair like spun silver and eyes cold as winter. "My lord," he said, his voice dripping with false courtesy, "surely you cannot mean to honor a mortal in this way. It is unprecedented. It violates every tradition we have." "Then let this be the beginning of a new tradition," he said. "Or would you like to challenge my authority, Mercurio? I am happy to settle the matter here and now." The silver-haired man's jaw tightened, but he bowed and stepped back. No one else moved. No one else spoke. The silence stretched, taut and dangerous, until finally a woman laughed, high and crystalline. "Well," she said, stepping forward, "if we are to have a mortal among us, perhaps we should at least make her welcome. I am Cassia. And you, little mortal, what shall we call you?" She found her voice, though it came out rougher than she intended. "You may use my name," she said. "I am not ashamed of it." Cassia smiled, showing teeth that were just slightly too sharp. "Bold," she said. "I like that. Perhaps you will survive here after all." The tension broke, though it did not disappear. People began to talk again, to move, to return to their conversations. But she could feel their eyes still on her, assessing, calculating, waiting for her to fail. He guided her to a seat at the high table, and food was brought, though she could barely taste it. He did not eat, but sat beside her, a silent presence that made it clear to everyone watching that she was not alone, that any slight against her would be taken as a slight against him. The evening stretched on, endless and exhausting. People approached to offer congratulations that felt like threats, to make observations that felt like insults carefully wrapped in courtesy. She answered as best she could, trying to navigate conversations where every word seemed to carry hidden meaning. Finally, mercifully, the gathering began to disperse. He rose and offered her his arm again. "Come," he said. "You have done enough for one night." As they left the hall, she heard the whispers start again behind them, louder now that they thought themselves unobserved. She tried not to listen, but fragments reached her anyway. "Won't last, mortal, weak, a plaything." A distraction. In the corridor outside, away from prying eyes, her composure finally cracked. She pulled away from him and leaned against the wall, her breath coming in short gasps. "That was horrible," she said. "Yes," he agreed, "it was. And it will be horrible again tomorrow, and the day after. This is the price of my protection. You will be questioned and challenged and tested at every turn." "Then why?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "Why bring me here? Why subject me to this?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because the alternative was watching you die. Because I am ancient and cold and I have forgotten how to feel most things, but when I look at you, I remember. And that is worth any amount of scandal or political maneuvering." She stared at him, trying to process this confession. "What do you remember?" she asked quietly. "What it was like to be human," he said. "What it was like to believe that the world could be more than an endless succession of nights. What it was like to hope." Tears burned behind her eyes, but she blinked them back. She would not cry, not here, not where anyone might see. "I do not know if I can do this," she whispered. "You can," he said with absolute certainty. "You have survived isolation and scorn and a life that would have broken lesser souls. You can survive this as well, and if I cannot, then I will carry you," he said simply. "For as long as you need me to," she let out a shaky laugh. "You make promises you may not be able to keep." "Perhaps," he said, "but I will try nonetheless." The days that followed fell into a strange pattern. She woke in the afternoon to find meals prepared and clothes laid out. She spent her evenings learning to navigate the social complexities of the court, trying to understand the subtle hierarchies and ancient grudges that governed behavior. He was always near, a silent guardian who ensured that mockery never crossed into open hostility, that disdain never became action. She learned the names and faces of the key players. Cassia, who seemed genuinely amused by her presence and occasionally offered advice that was actually helpful. Mercurio, who watched her with barely concealed contempt but never moved openly against her. Theron, the ancient one who had seen empires rise and fall and regarded her with something that might have been pity or might have been curiosity. She learned to move through the castle's corridors without getting lost, to understand which rooms were safe and which were better avoided. She learned that the servants, contrary to what she expected, were not unfriendly. Many of them were mortal themselves, bound to the castle through old contracts and stranger bargains. And they seemed to view her with a kind of cautious hope, as if her presence might somehow make their own lives easier. Most importantly, she learned about him. She learned that he did not sleep, but spent the day hours in a room deep beneath the castle where sunlight could not penetrate. She learned that he had ruled this domain for over 500 years, and that his word was absolute law. She learned that he was feared and respected in equal measure, and that bringing her here had been viewed as either a sign of weakness or a calculated political move. Depending on who was interpreting it, she learned, too, that despite his claims of coldness and emptiness, he was not as far removed from humanity as he pretended. She saw it in the way he would adjust the fire in her rooms to make sure she was warm enough, in the way he brought her books from the library when he noticed she was restless, in the small gestures of consideration that he never commented on and probably hoped she would not notice. 3 weeks after her arrival, Cassia invited her to walk in the castle gardens. It was the first time anyone other than him had sought out her company voluntarily, and she accepted with a mixture of suspicion and gratitude. The gardens were beautiful in a wild, untamed way, with paths that seemed to lead nowhere and flowers that bloomed in defiance of season or sense. They walked in silence for a while, and then Cassia said, "You have surprised everyone, you know. Most thought you would flee within days, or break, or both." "I almost did," she admitted. "Many times. But you did not," Cassia said. "Why?" She considered the question. "Because I have nowhere else to go," she said finally. "Because despite everything, I am safer here than I was in the world I left behind. And because I made a choice and I want to see where it leads." Cassia nodded thoughtfully. "You are stronger than you look. That will serve you well here. But I must warn you, child, the Master's interest in you has caused ripples. There are those who see opportunity in it, who think that if they can turn you against him, or use you as leverage, they can weaken his position." "I will not betray him," she said fiercely. Cassia smiled. "I believe you, but betrayal is not always intentional. Sometimes all it takes is a moment of weakness, a word spoken in anger or fear. You must be vigilant. Trust no one completely. Not even me? Not even him?" she asked. Cassia's expression grew serious. "Especially not him," she said. "He is not cruel, but he is not human. His affections, such as they are, operate on a timescale you cannot comprehend. What seems like devotion to you may simply be curiosity or possessiveness. Do not mistake his protection for love." The words stung, but she could not deny their wisdom. "I will remember," she said. "Good," Cassia said, her tone lightening. "Now come, let me show you the roses. They only bloom under moonlight, and they are quite beautiful." That night at the formal dinner, she noticed a new face among the crowd. A young man, or at least something that appeared young, with dark curls and eyes like amber honey. He watched her throughout the meal, his gaze intense but not hostile. When the dinner ended, he approached. "My lady," he said, bowing deeply. "Forgive my boldness, but I wanted to introduce myself. I am Lucien, recently returned from traveling in the Eastern Territories." She inclined her head, wary. "Welcome home, then." He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look almost human. "I have heard much about you," he said. "The mortal who tamed our fearsome lord. You are quite the sensation." "I have tamed nothing," she said sharply. "And I would appreciate it if people stopped speaking of me as if I was some curiosity to be examined." His smile widened. "Forgive me," he said. "I meant no offense. It is simply rare to see anyone, mortal or otherwise, who can stand beside the Master as an equal. Most of us spend our time trying not to anger him. I am not his equal," she said. "I am under his protection. There is a difference." "Is there?" Lucien asked, his voice dropping lower. "From what I have observed, he treats you with a deference he shows to no one else. He alters his schedule to accommodate you. He listens when you speak. That, my lady, is not the behavior of a master towards someone merely under protection." Before she could respond, she felt a presence behind her. She did not need to turn to know it was him. Lucien's smile faltered, and he stepped back. "Lucien," the Lord said, his voice pleasant but carrying an edge like frost over deep water. "I trust you are making our guest feel welcome." "Of course, my lord," Lucien said quickly. "I was simply introducing myself." "Good," he said. "See that your introductions remain respectful." Lucien bowed again and retreated into the crowd. She turned to look up at him, seeing the tension in his jaw, the coldness in his eyes that had not been there moments before. "What was that about?" she asked quietly. "Nothing," he said. "Lucien is ambitious and likes to test boundaries. I was simply reminding him where those boundaries lie." She wanted to press further, but something in his expression warned her off. Instead, she said, "Shall we walk?" I find I am tired of crowds tonight. His expression softened slightly. Yes, he said. Let us walk. They left the hall and wandered through corridors lit by torches that never seemed to burn down. Eventually, they found themselves in a tower room with windows that looked out over the valley below. In the distance, she could see the lights of her old village, small and insignificant from this height. Do you miss it? He asked, following her gaze. No, she said honestly. I miss the idea of it, perhaps. The fantasy that someday they might accept me, that I might belong. But the reality was never kind to me. This, strange as it is, feels more like home than that place ever did. You have adapted well, he said. Better than I hoped. She turned away from the window to face him. Why me, she asked. Of all the people you might have encountered that night, why did you choose to protect me, to bring me here? He was quiet for a long time and she thought he might not answer. Then he said, because when I looked at you, I saw myself. Not as I am now, but as I was, alone, rejected, waiting for an end that never came. And I thought perhaps I could offer you what no one ever offered me. A different story. Her throat tightened with emotion. And what happens, she asked, when you tire of this story? When I am no longer interesting? His hand came up to cup her face, his touch cold but gentle. Then, he said softly, we will write a new one together. For as long as you wish it. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. In that moment, she could almost believe it. Could almost believe that this strange existence, surrounded by creatures of nightmare, protected by a being who had forgotten how to be mortal, might actually become something resembling happiness. But Cassia's warning echoed in her mind. Do not mistake his protection for love. She pulled back gently, opening her eyes. We should return, she said. People will talk. They already talk, he said. But you are right. We should maintain appearances, for now. The days turned to weeks, and the weeks to months. The court slowly, grudgingly began to accept her presence. She was still watched, still whispered about, but the hostility faded into a kind of wary tolerance. She learned to hold her own in conversations, to deflect insults with grace, to move through the social labyrinth without stumbling. She also learned that despite everything, despite the impossibility of their situation, she was falling in love with him. Not in the sudden, overwhelming way of storybooks, but in the slow, inevitable way of water wearing down stone. She loved the way he listened when she spoke, giving her his full attention, as if her words were the most important thing in the world. She loved the rare moments when he smiled, really smiled, and the coldness left his eyes. She loved his intelligence, his dry wit, the glimpses of the man he had been before the centuries had worn away so much of what made him human, and she thought, though she could not be certain, that he might love her too, in his own way, in the way that creatures like him could love, which was perhaps not love as mortals understood it, but something more patient, more absolute, more terrifying in its constancy. On the night of the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, the court held a great celebration. The halls were decorated with evergreen boughs and winter roses, and music filled the air. She wore a gown of deep crimson, and her hair was left loose to fall in waves down her back. When she entered the great hall, the conversation faltered, and she felt dozens of eyes on her. He was waiting for her at the high table, and when he saw her, something flickered in his expression. He stood and descended the steps to meet her, offering his hand. You are beautiful, he said quietly. You outshine every star in the sky. She felt heat rise to her cheeks. You exaggerate, she said. I do not, he replied. Come, dance with me. She had learned to dance in the months since her arrival, taught by Cassia and the other ladies of the court. But dancing with him was different. He moved with inhuman grace, leading her through the steps with perfect precision. Everyone else faded away, and for those few moments it was only the two of them, circling each other in the candlelight like planets caught in orbit. When the dance ended, he did not release her hand. Instead, he led her from the hall, through corridors and up staircases, until they reached the highest tower of the castle. The door opened onto a balcony that overlooked the entire valley, and the view took her breath away. The world spread out below them, covered in snow that glowed silver in the moonlight. I wanted to show you this, he said, on the longest night from the highest point, to remind you of how far you have come. She leaned against the railing, looking out at the landscape. A year ago, she said, I was alone in a cottage waiting for nothing. Now I am here in a place I never could have imagined. Sometimes I cannot believe any of it is real." "It is real," he said, standing beside her. "You are real. This is real." She turned to look at him, at his profile sharp against the night sky. "What am I to you?" she asked. "Truly." He was silent for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he said, "You are the first thing in 500 years that has made me want to see another dawn. You are the reason I remember what it was like to feel. You are impossible and infuriating and more brave than anyone I have ever known. You are mine to protect, and I am yours to command. Is that not enough?" "It should be," she whispered. "But I want to know if you love me." His jaw tightened. "Love is a mortal word," he said. "It means different things to different people. What I feel for you goes beyond that simple label. It is possession and protection, and something close to worship. It is the knowledge that if anyone harmed you, I would burn the world to ashes. Is that love? I do not know, but it is all I have to give." Tears slid down her cheeks, cold in the winter air. "It is enough," she said. "It has to be enough." He reached out and wiped the tears away with his thumb. "Do not cry," he said softly. "Not tonight. Tonight is for celebration, for looking back at what you have survived and forward to what you might become." "And what might I become?" she asked. "Whatever you choose," he said. "That is the gift of my protection. Within these walls you are free to be anything." She laughed, the sound ragged. "Free," she repeated. "In a castle full of creatures who drink blood and live forever. That is a strange kind of freedom." "All freedom is strange," he said. "It is what we do with it that matters." They stood together in silence, watching the night, and she felt something settle inside her. Not quite peace, but something close to it. Acceptance, perhaps. Or simply the understanding that this was her life now, and she could either fight against it or embrace it. She chose to embrace it. When they returned to the hall, the celebration was in full swing. People danced and drank and laughed with the slightly manic edge that came from knowing the sun would not rise for hours yet. She rejoined the festivities, allowing Cassia to pull her into a dance, accepting compliments on her dress with grace, even exchanging pleasantries with Mercurio, who seemed marginally less hostile than usual. And through it all, she felt his eyes on her, watching, protective, a constant presence that both comforted and unsettled her. As the night wore on toward dawn, people began to drift away, seeking the deep places where sunlight could not reach. She found herself alone in the great hall, the fire burning low, the decorations casting strange shadows on the walls. She should have been tired, but instead she felt energized, alive in a way she had not felt in years. He appeared from the shadows as if summoned by her thoughts. "You should rest," he said. "The sun will rise soon." "I am not tired," she said. "I feel as if I could stay awake forever." "That is the effect of this place," he said. "The magic in the stones, the weight of centuries. It gets into your blood, makes you forget you are mortal." She looked at him sharply. "Is that what is happening?" "Am I forgetting?" "No," he said, moving closer. "You could never forget. Mortality is written into every line of your body, every breath you take. That is what makes you precious. That is what makes every moment with you feel stolen from time itself." His words should have frightened her, should have reminded her of the fundamental difference between them. But instead, they made her feel powerful, as if her mortality was not a weakness, but a gift. She closed the distance between them, standing so close she could feel the cold radiating from his skin. "I am not afraid of you," she said. "I know," he replied. "That is what terrifies me." Then they were kissing, or perhaps she was kissing him. She could not tell who moved first. His lips were cold, but they warmed against hers, and she felt something inside her ignite, a heat that had nothing to do with the dying fire. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she melted into him, letting go of every reservation, every fear, every doubt. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, or at least she was breathing hard while he made a credible imitation, she saw something in his eyes she had never seen before: vulnerability. As if in that moment, he had revealed more of himself than he ever intended. "I should not have done that," he said, but he did not release her. "Why not?" she asked. "Because there are rules," he said. "Ancient rules about relationships between our kind and yours. Because I do not want to hurt you. Because once we begin down this path, there is no turning back. I am already on this path, she said. I have been since the night you appeared at my door, and I am not turning back now. He searched her face, looking for hesitation, for doubt, for any sign that she did not mean what she said. But she met his gaze steadily, letting him see everything she felt, everything she wanted. Then we continue forward, he said finally. Together. Whatever that means. Whatever it costs. Yes, she said simply. And so they did. The months that followed were different. Somehow, despite nothing officially changing, everyone knew. The way he looked at her, the way she moved through the halls with a new confidence, the way he would stand when she entered a room, would listen when she spoke, would defer to her judgment in ways that shocked the court. Mercurio approached her one evening in the library. "You have won," he said without preamble. "I do not know how you did it, but you have made yourself essential to him. That is more than anyone else has managed in centuries." She looked up from her book. "I did not set out to win anything," she said. "Perhaps that is why you succeeded," he replied. "He is ancient and cynical and has seen every game played 1,000 times. But you were not playing a game. You were simply surviving, and somehow that was what he needed to see." "What do you want, Mercurio?" she asked, tired of the circular conversation. "I want to understand," he said, "how a mortal girl with nothing to offer could become the center of his world. I want to know if it is real, or if it is simply some elaborate delusion we are all participating in." She closed her book and stood, meeting his eyes directly. "It is real," she said. "As real as anything else in this strange existence. And if you cannot accept that, then that is your failing, not mine." He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps you are right," he said. "Perhaps I am simply too old to recognize something genuine when I see it." After he left, she sat down again, but she could not focus on the words before her. She was thinking about what he had said about being the center of someone's world. Was she really that to him? Could she be? That night, she asked him directly, "Am I truly that important to you? Or is this all some elaborate game that I do not understand?" They were in her rooms, sitting before the fire, a routine they had fallen into. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw centuries of careful control warring with something more raw, more honest. "You are not a game," he said finally. "You are the only real thing in a world of shadows and illusions. You are the reason I remember why I wanted to survive in the first place. Without you, this existence would be merely time passing, an endless succession of nights with no meaning. With you, each moment has weight and purpose. Does that answer your question?" She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. It did. A year passed, measured in festivals and celebrations, in the slow turn of seasons outside the castle walls. She had long since stopped marking the days, stopped counting time in the mortal way. Life had become a series of nights, each one bleeding into the next, each one filled with the strange beauty of this impossible existence. But she had not forgotten that she was mortal. Her body reminded her daily, in the need for food and sleep, in the way she aged while everyone around her remained frozen in eternal youth. She watched herself in the mirror and saw the first fine lines appearing around her eyes, the subtle changes that spoke of time's passage. She did not mention it, but she knew he noticed. She caught him sometimes, staring at her with an expression she could not quite read. Regret, perhaps, or resignation, or simply the sadness of knowing that all things, even this, would eventually end. One night, as they sat together in the tower room that had become their sanctuary, she said, "I am going to die someday." He went very still beside her. "I know," he said quietly. "And when I do, you will still be here, unchanging, eternal. You will watch me age and weaken and finally disappear. And then you will continue on as you always have." "Yes," he said. She turned to look at him. "Does that frighten you?" "It terrifies me," he admitted. "I have lost many people over the centuries, but I always knew I would lose them. It was inevitable. With you somehow I let myself forget. I let myself believe that perhaps time would not touch you, that you would remain as you are forever. But that is a fantasy. Time touches all mortal things. There are stories," she said carefully, "about mortals who were changed, who became like you." His jaw tightened. "There are," he said. But the process is not kind, and the result is not always what one hopes for. Some do not survive it. Others survive but lose essential parts of themselves. And even if successful, the person who emerges is not quite the same as who they were before. But it is possible, she pressed. Yes, he said. It is possible, but I will not force that choice on you. If you wish to remain as you are, to live out your mortal span and then pass into whatever lies beyond, I will honor that, and I will remember you for the rest of my existence. She looked out at the night, at the stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. I do not want to die, she said. I have finally found a life worth living. I do not want to give it up. Then you will not have to, he said. When you are ready, when you are certain, we will discuss it further. But know this, whatever you choose, whatever you become or remain, you will always have my protection. You will always have me. She leaned against him, feeling the cold solidity of his presence. That is all I need, she said. The rest we will figure out as we go. And so they continued. Night after night, year after year, building something that had no name in any language. Something that transcended the categories of mortal and immortal, human and monster, love and possession. They simply were together, and that was enough. The court had long since accepted her place among them. She was no longer the scandal, no longer the curiosity. She was simply the Lord's companion, the woman who walked beside him through the endless nights, who spoke with his authority, who had somehow made herself indispensable to the functioning of this strange, dark place. And when she looked back at the girl she had been, isolated and rejected, waiting in her cottage for an ending that never came, she could barely recognize herself. That girl was gone, transformed not by magic or violence, but by the simple act of being seen, being valued, being protected. She had become something new, something that existed in the space between mortal and eternal, human and other. She had become the one who had sheltered the Lord in his hour of need, and in doing so, had sheltered herself from a world that had never wanted her. On a night when the moon was full and the air tasted of snow to come, she stood at the tower window and looked out at the valley. The village below was dark, most of its inhabitants asleep. Somewhere down there was the cottage where she had lived, probably empty now, or occupied by some other unfortunate soul. She felt no nostalgia for it, no desire to return, that life was over. This was her life now, and she had chosen it, would choose it again every day, if given the chance. He came up behind her silent as always and wrapped his arms around her waist. What are you thinking, he asked. That I am grateful, she said, for everything, for the storm that brought you to my door, for the courage to open it, for all the nights since then. As am I, he said, his voice soft against her ear. You saved me, you know, not just that night, but every night since. You reminded me why existence might be worth continuing. We saved each other, she said. That is how this works. Yes, he agreed. That is exactly how this works. They stood together in silence, watching the night, two figures in a tower, separate from the world below but no longer lonely. They had each other, and in the end, perhaps that was all anyone could ask for. To be seen, to be valued, to be remembered. And when the bells began to ring without wind or hand to move them, announcing to the castle and the valley beyond that something significant had occurred, she knew what it meant. It was his acknowledgement, public and undeniable, that she was not merely under his protection, but had become essential to his very existence. She turned in his arms to face him. What have you done? She asked. What I should have done long ago, he said. I have declared before the court and the world that you are mine, not as possession, but as equal. That your word carries the weight of my own. That to honor you is to honor me, and to disrespect you is to challenge my authority directly. You did not need to do that, she said. I know, he replied, but I wanted to, because you are not just the woman I protect. You are the woman I choose. Every night I choose you, and I wanted everyone to know it. Tears filled her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. I choose you too, she said, every night, for as many nights as I am given. Then let us make the most of them, he said. And they did. The story of the seamstress's daughter who tamed the lord of the distant places spread far beyond the valley. It became legend, told in whispers around fires, embellished with each retelling until fact and fiction blurred beyond recognition. Some said she had bewitched him with dark magic. Others said she was a saint sent to redeem a monster. Still others said it was simply love, that most mysterious and powerful of forces. But those who knew the truth understood. It was simpler and more complicated than any of those explanations. It was about two lonely souls finding each other in the darkness. It was about choice and courage, and the stubborn refusal to accept the story the world wanted to write for you. It was about creating something new from the ruins of what had been. Years passed. Though time had become fluid and strange, she made her choice eventually, when the lines on her face had deepened and her hair had begun to silver. She chose continuation over ending, eternity over the finite. The transformation was painful, but she survived it. Emerging changed, but still recognizably herself. And in the centuries that followed, she walked beside him through the endless nights. His companion, his equal, his choice. The castle changed around them, adapting to new eras, but they remained constant. A testament to what could be built when two people, mortal or otherwise, chose to face the darkness together rather than alone. The village eventually forgot the girl who had lived on the hill. But the castle remembered. Every stone, every shadow, every whisper of wind through the towers carried the memory of her arrival. Of the night a wounded stranger appeared at a lonely door and was given shelter. And in the end, that was what mattered. Not how the story began, but that it continued. Not that she was remembered by the world, but that she was remembered by the one who mattered most. She had become eternal. Not through magic or transformation, but through the simple act of being loved by someone who would never forget. And that, perhaps, was the greatest gift of all. The decades accumulated like snowfall, silent and inevitable, each one adding its weight to the ones before. She learned what it meant to exist outside the normal flow of time, to watch seasons turn with the detachment of someone who would see thousands more. The transformation had taken something from her, the warm urgency of mortality, the knowledge that each moment was precious because it would not come again. But it had given her something too, the ability to see patterns in the chaos, to understand that nothing was permanent except the choice to continue. The castle had become truly hers in those years, not through declaration or ceremony, but through the slow accumulation of small decisions. She changed things gradually, carefully. The heavy curtains that had blocked all light were replaced with ones that could be drawn back, allowing the rooms to remember what daylight looked like even if their occupants could not enjoy it. She filled the library with books from the mortal world, stories and histories and philosophies that kept her connected to the humanity she had traded but not entirely abandoned. The gardens flourished under her attention. She spent hours there in the early evenings, tending plants that bloomed in darkness, coaxing life from soil that had forgotten how to nurture anything but thorns. The servants, both mortal and otherwise, began to seek her out when they had concerns, knowing she would listen where others might dismiss them. She became, without intending to, the heart that the castle had been missing, the warmth that made it a home rather than merely a fortress. He watched all of this with something that might have been wonder. Sometimes she would catch him observing her from doorways, his expression unguarded in those moments, and she would see in his face the weight of all the centuries before she had arrived. The loneliness he had endured, the emptiness he had learned to ignore. She had filled a space in his existence that he had not known was hollow, and the knowledge of it humbled him in ways that power and age never had. But immortality came with its own burdens, lessons she was only beginning to learn. The first came on a winter night when word arrived that the village below, her village, had been destroyed by fire. An accident, they said, a candle knocked over in the tavern, flames spreading faster than anyone could contain them. By morning there was nothing left but ash and scorched stone. She stood at the tower window looking down at the smoking ruins and felt something twist inside her chest. Those people had rejected her, feared her, made her life a misery. But they had been her people nonetheless, the last connection to the girl she had been. And now they were gone, erased as thoroughly as if they had never existed. He found her there as dawn approached, tears tracking silently down her face. "I should feel something," she said. "Grief or satisfaction or at least some sense of closure." but all I feel is empty. As if a door I did not know was still open has finally closed. That is what eternity does, he said quietly, standing beside her. It closes doors one by one until you are left in a room with no exits and no entrances. Only the endless present. Is that what you feel? She asked. Trapped in an eternal present, sometimes, he admitted. Less so since you came. You remind me that even in eternity, things can change. That new doors can open even as old ones close. She leaned against him, drawing comfort from his presence. Will I become like that? She asked. Cold and distant, unable to feel. You will become whatever you choose to become, he said. That has not changed. The transformation gave you time, but it did not take away your will. Hold on to that. Hold on to the parts of yourself that are still warm, still human. Do not let the centuries wear them away, she tried. In the years that followed, she tried very hard. She continued her routines, her gardens, her books, her conversations with the servants. She made herself care about small things, believing that if she could preserve her capacity for small emotions, the larger ones would follow. And mostly it worked. She remained herself, recognizably human in all the ways that mattered, even as the decades continued their patient accumulation. But there were moments when she felt it, the coldness creeping in at the edges. A servant would come to her with some problem, and she would find herself calculating the most efficient solution rather than the most compassionate one. She would walk through the gardens and see not beauty, but simply an arrangement of matter, plants growing according to predictable patterns, no more miraculous than stones rolling downhill. In those moments, she understood what he had been trying to warn her about, the slow erosion of everything that made existence meaningful. On her 100th anniversary in the castle, a celebration was held. The court gathered in the Great Hall, now so familiar to her that she could navigate it blindfolded. Cassia, still her closest ally, raised a glass in toast. To the lady who chose eternity, she said. May she never regret it. The words hung in the air, both blessing and curse. She smiled and accepted the tribute, but later, alone in her rooms, she let the smile fade. Did she regret it? She did not know. The question felt too large, too complicated. She had gained so much, the love of an ancient being, a place in the world, purpose and meaning. But she had lost things too. The possibility of children, of growing old beside someone who aged with her, of the natural ending that gave shape to a mortal life. She was pondering this when he entered, moving through the door without knocking, as he always did. You are thinking too much, he observed, settling into the chair across from her. I can see it in your face. Someone has to think, she said. You have had centuries to make peace with your choices. I am still learning to live with mine. Regret is pointless, he said. The past cannot be changed and the future is not yet written. There is only now, this moment. Can you not find contentment in it? She looked at him. This creature who had fundamentally altered the trajectory of her existence and felt a surge of something that was part love, part resentment, part something else she had no name for. It is easy for you to say, she replied. You have forgotten what it is like to be new to this, to still remember the warmth of the sun on your skin, the taste of food that actually nourished you, the beating of a human heart. His expression darkened. You think I have forgotten, he said, his voice low. You think I do not remember every detail of what I lost? I remember the sun like a wound that never heals. I remember warmth like a language I can no longer speak. Do not presume to tell me what I have forgotten. She had never heard that tone from him before, that rawness. It shocked her into silence. After a moment, he continued more quietly. I do not offer you platitudes because I have made peace with what I am. I offer them because they are the only way to survive. If you spend eternity mourning what you have lost, you will go mad. I have seen it happen. I will not watch it happen to you. Then help me, she said, her voice breaking. Help me learn how to bear this. Because right now, I feel like I am standing in a river, trying to hold on to water, watching it slip through my fingers no matter how tightly I grasp. He rose and crossed to her, kneeling beside her chair so that their eyes were level. You bear it by remembering why you chose it, he said. You chose continuation because you wanted more time with me, because you wanted to see what we could build together, because you were not ready for your story to end. Those reasons are still valid. I am still here. We are still building. Your story continues. But for how long, she whispered. How long before I become like you? ancient and cold and so far removed from humanity that I cannot remember why any of it mattered. As long as you wish, he said. There is no timetable for this. Some of us lose ourselves quickly, within a few decades. Others hold on to their humanity for centuries. It is a choice renewed every night. Choose warmth over cold. Choose connection over isolation. Choose to care, even when it is easier not to. And I will be here, reminding you, for as long as you need me. She reached out and touched his face, tracing the sharp lines of his features. You are not as cold as you pretend, she said. Beneath all that ice, something still burns. Perhaps, he allowed. Or perhaps you simply make me remember how to burn. They stayed like that for a long time, her hand on his face, his eyes on hers, neither speaking. Outside, the night continued its patient watch, and somewhere in the castle, the servants moved through their routines, and the world turned on its axis, indifferent to the small struggles of those trying to hold on to their humanity in the face of eternity. Finally, she said, I do not regret my choice. Whatever doubts I have, whatever struggles lie ahead, I do not regret choosing you. Choosing this, good, he said, because I would not survive losing you. Not again. Not after having had you. Again, she questioned. You have lost others. His jaw tightened. Once, he said. A very long time ago. Before I learned that loving mortals was simply volunteering to have your heart torn out. Before I understood that attachment was weakness. But then you came, and I was foolish enough to hope that perhaps this time could be different. It is different, she said, because I am not mortal anymore. I am here, and I will continue to be here. You will not lose me to time. No, he agreed. But there are other ways to lose someone. Distance, coldness, the slow drift into separate existences. That is what I fear now, that you will remain here physically but leave me in every other way that matters. She pulled him closer, wrapping her arms around him. I will not leave, she promised. Not in any way. We will navigate this together, the way we have navigated everything else. He held her tightly, and she felt in that embrace the depth of his fear, his need, his love. For all his power and age, he was as vulnerable as she was, perhaps more so. He had more to lose, having lost so much already. And she had the power to destroy him simply by withdrawing, by letting the coldness win, by becoming someone he no longer recognized. She would not do that to him. Whatever it cost her, whatever struggles lay ahead, she would hold on to herself, for his sake, if not her own. That was the real gift she could give him, not just her presence, but her persistence, the refusal to let eternity make her into something less than she was. The celebration continued in the hall below, music and laughter drifting up through the stones. But they remained in her rooms, holding each other, finding strength in the contact, in the simple fact of not being alone. Later, when the castle had quieted and the dawn was approaching, she said, Tell me about the one you lost, the one from before. He was silent for so long she thought he would refuse. Then slowly he began to speak. Her name was Alara, he said. She was a healer in a small town near the coast. I was wounded, much as I was when I came to you. She took me in, cared for me, asked nothing in return. I thought I could protect her, keep her safe from the dangers of my world. But I was wrong. What happened? She asked gently. Rivals, he said. They found her, used her to get to me. By the time I arrived, she was already dying. I offered her the choice you made, the transformation, but she refused. She said she would rather die human than live as a monster. Those were her last words to me, that I was a monster, and she wanted no part of what I was. The pain in his voice was centuries old, but still sharp. She held him tighter. I am sorry, she said. That must have been unbearable. It was, he said. For a long time after, I wished I could follow her into death. But our kind do not die easily, and I lacked the courage to force the issue. So I endured. And over time, the pain faded to a distant ache, and I told myself I would never allow anyone close enough to hurt me again. He pulled back to look at her, and then you opened your door to me and I was lost. I am not her, she said. I made a different choice. I wanted this. I know, he said. That is what allows me to hope. That is what makes this time different. She kissed him then, pouring into it everything she felt, all the love and fear and determination and hope. When they broke apart, she said, We will make this work. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, we will find a way to be together without losing ourselves. Yes, he said, we will. And in that moment, with dawn approaching and the castle settling into its daytime quiet, she believed it. She believed that love could be enough, that choice could be enough, that the simple act of holding on could be enough to weather the centuries ahead. Time would test that belief. Eternity had a way of testing everything, wearing away certainty like water wearing away stone. But she had survived everything the world had thrown at her so far. She would survive this too. They would survive it together. The second century of her transformed existence brought changes she had not anticipated. The world beyond the castle walls was evolving rapidly, technology advancing at a pace that left even the immortal inhabitants of the castle struggling to keep up. The isolation that had once been their protection was becoming harder to maintain. Mortals had cameras now, satellites, devices that could capture images and transmit them across the world in seconds. Secrecy required new strategies, constant vigilance. She took charge of this adaptation, recognizing that her more recent humanity gave her insights the others lacked. She understood the mortal world in ways they had forgotten or never known. Under her guidance, the castle acquired the technology necessary to monitor and control its exposure. False identities were created, records were altered, security systems were installed that would alert them to any intrusions long before danger arrived. The court, initially resistant to these changes, gradually came to rely on her expertise. Mercurio, ancient and proud, actually sought her advice on how to navigate the modern financial systems. Theron, oldest of them all, asked her to explain social media, a concept so foreign to his medieval mind that he struggled to comprehend its implications. Even Cassia, who prided herself on adapting to new eras, deferred to her judgment on matters of contemporary culture. She became, without any formal title, the bridge between the castle and the world outside. It gave her purpose beyond simply existing, beyond the endless succession of knights. She was needed not just by him, but by the entire community. And that need anchored her, gave her reason to remain engaged, to care about outcomes, to fight against the creeping coldness that threatened to consume all emotion. But it also meant increased contact with the mortal world. And that contact brought its own challenges. She established networks of human agents, people who handled the castle's business dealings, who ensured supplies were delivered, who managed the properties and investments that funded their existence. Most of these agents never met her in person, conducting all business through electronic communication. But a few, the most trusted, came to the castle for meetings. One of these was a young woman named Sarah, brilliant and ambitious, who managed their legal affairs with a competence that impressed even the most skeptical members of the court. Sarah had been working for them for 3 years when she finally made the connection that her employer was not entirely human. To her credit, she did not panic or flee. Instead, she requested a meeting to discuss terms. They met in the castle's modern office, a room that could have belonged to any corporation anywhere in the world. All glass and steel and technology. Sarah sat across the desk from her, posture perfect, expression carefully neutral. "I know what you are," Sarah said without preamble. "Or at least, I know you are not what you pretend to be. Human, I mean." She considered lying but recognized it would be pointless. The woman had clearly done her research, had put together enough pieces to form a picture. "Very well," she said. "And what do you intend to do with this knowledge?" "That depends," Sarah said, "on what you intend to do with me. I have served you well, kept your secrets, managed your affairs with discretion. I would like to continue doing so, but I need to know what I am dealing with, what the risks are." She studied the young woman, seeing in her something of her own former self. The hunger for something more, the willingness to step into darkness if it meant escaping the mundane. Sarah was perhaps 30 with her whole mortal life ahead of her, and she was choosing to ally herself with creatures who existed outside the normal rules of reality. "The risks are considerable," she said honestly. "Knowledge of our existence puts you in danger, both from us if we decide you are a liability, and from others of our kind who might see you as a tool to be used against us. Your life expectancy, frankly, has just decreased significantly." Sarah's jaw tightened, but her gaze did not waver. "I assumed as much," she said. But I also assume you would not have allowed me to get this close, to learn this much. If you intended to simply eliminate me, you could have had any number of lawyers. You chose me for a reason. You remind me of someone, she said. Of who I used to be, determined, willing to take risks, brave enough to open doors even when you do not know what waits on the other side. Is that a compliment or a warning? Sarah asked. Both, she replied. I opened a door once, let in something impossible, and it changed everything. I gained things I never thought possible. But I lost things too, things I did not even know could be lost. You need to understand that before you commit to this path. There is no going back. Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering. Then she said, I have spent my entire life playing it safe, following rules, meeting expectations, building a career that looks impressive on paper but feels hollow. When I started working for you, I felt something I had not felt in years. Excitement, purpose, the sense that I was part of something larger than myself. If walking through your door means risking everything, then that is a risk I am willing to take. She saw in that moment the echo of her own choice, made so long ago in a cottage on a hill. The same desperation, the same hunger for meaning, the same willingness to gamble everything on the possibility of something more. And she understood that this was the cycle, the pattern that repeated across centuries. Those who were meant to find them would find them. Those who were brave enough to enter would enter. And their lives would be forever changed for better or worse. Very well, she said. But understand this. If you betray us, if you expose us, the consequences will be severe. Not just for you, but for everyone you care about. We protect our own, but we are ruthless with our enemies. I understand, Sarah said. And one more thing, she added. Eventually you will age. I will not. That is something you need to consider. In 20 years, you will be 50 and I will look exactly as I do now. People will notice. Questions will be asked. Then perhaps we should make sure those questions are never asked, Sarah said. Or perhaps when the time comes, I will make the same choice you did. The presumption should have angered her, but instead she felt something like kinship. This woman was not naive. She understood what she was asking for, what she was offering. And perhaps in another few decades, when the time was right, the choice could be offered. Another bridge between the mortal and immortal worlds. Another soul choosing continuation over ending. She stood and extended her hand. Welcome then, she said. Truly welcome. You are no longer just an employee. You are part of this family with all the privileges and dangers that entails. Sarah shook her hand, her grip firm. Thank you, she said. I will not let you down. After Sarah left, she found him waiting in the corridor outside. You were listening, she said. Of course, he replied. You are interviewing potential additions to our household. That concerns me directly. She is good, she said. Smart and ambitious and brave. She will be an asset. She is mortal, he pointed out. She will die, probably sooner than she thinks. Mortals who involve themselves in our world rarely live to old age. Then we will protect her, she said. As we protect all who serve us loyally. He studied her face. You see yourself in her, he said. The girl you used to be. Yes, she admitted. Is that wrong? No, he said. But be careful. Do not get too attached. She is not you, and her story may not end as well as yours did. His words carried weight, the wisdom of centuries. But she could not help feeling that Sarah's arrival was somehow significant, a piece falling into place in a pattern she could not yet see clearly. The castle had been static for so long, unchanging. Perhaps it was time for new energy, new perspectives. Perhaps that was how they would survive the coming centuries, by allowing new life to enter, by remaining connected to the world they had withdrawn from. Time would tell. It always did. The months after Sarah's acceptance into their inner circle brought a strange vitality to the castle. The young woman threw herself into her work with renewed dedication, now that she understood the full scope of what she was protecting. She brought ideas, innovations, ways of leveraging modern systems that none of them had considered. More importantly, she brought laughter. She would forget sometimes that they were not human, would make jokes that referenced mortality and aging, would comment on current events with the assumption that everyone cared about the same things she did. These small moments of normalcy were jarring at first, but gradually they became something the castle needed. A reminder that beyond their walls, life continued in all its messy, vital, temporary glory. She found herself spending more time with Sarah, teaching her about the castle's history, introducing her to the others, showing her how to navigate the complex social hierarchies that governed immortal society. And in doing so, she reconnected with parts of herself she had thought lost. The teacher, the guide, the one who remembered what it was like to be new and frightened and determined not to show it. He watched this developing friendship with mixed emotions. On one hand, he was glad to see her engaged, energized, more like her old self. On the other hand, he recognized the danger. Sarah would age and die, and when she did, the loss would hurt. It always did. Mortals were beautiful and terrible precisely because of their impermanence, like flowers that bloomed brilliantly and then withered, leaving only memory behind. But he said nothing, allowing her to form this connection, understanding that she needed it. Immortality without connection was not living, it was simply not dying, and he wanted her to live, truly live, for as long as she could manage it. One evening, Sarah asked the question he had been waiting for. She was in the library with them, reviewing documents, when she set down her tablet and said, "How do you do it? How do you keep caring after so many years? After watching so many people die?" There was a long silence. Then she said, "You find reasons. Small reasons sometimes. A garden that needs tending. A book you want to finish. A person who makes you laugh. You collect these reasons like stones, building a wall against the emptiness. And you remember that caring is a choice, one you have to make over and over again. And when you cannot find reasons," Sarah asked, "when the wall crumbles, then you borrow someone else's reasons until you can build your own again," he said quietly. That is what love is at its core, lending strength when the other person has none left. Sarah looked between them, seeing something that made her smile. "You really do love each other," she said. "I wondered if creatures like you could feel that way." "But you do." "We do," she confirmed, "though it looks different than it might for mortals. It is quieter, perhaps, more patient, built to withstand centuries rather than decades." "That sounds lonely," Sarah said. "Sometimes it is," she admitted, "but less so than the alternative." The conversation stayed with her long after Sarah had left for the night. She thought about love, about how it had evolved over the years, shifting from the desperate passion of those early days to something deeper, more fundamental. They did not speak of it often, she and he. There was no need. It was simply the foundation on which everything else was built, so constant that it required no acknowledgement. But perhaps, she thought, they should acknowledge it more often. Perhaps in the fight against coldness and distance, speaking the truth of what they felt could be its own kind of armor. That night, lying beside him in the darkness, she said, "I love you. I do not say it often enough, but it is true. Everything I have become, everything I am, exists because you gave me the chance to choose. And I choose you still, every night." He turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the faint light from the window. "I love you too," he said. "In whatever way I am still capable of love. You are the reason I remember why any of this matters. Without you, I would simply be existing. With you, I am alive." They lay together in silence, holding hands in the darkness, and she felt again that sense of rightness, of being exactly where she was meant to be. The doubts and fears were still there, would probably always be there. But so was this certainty, this connection that time had only strengthened. Morning would come, bringing new challenges, new adaptations required. The world would continue to change, and they would have to change with it or be left behind. But they would face it together, as they had faced everything else. And that, in the end, was enough. If this story found a reflection in you, leave a comment and share it. Sometimes the quietest pain is the most human.